Hello and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and I'm going to be honest, I don't feel good. It's been a little bit of a rough week. I'm not feeling good, but I went to go look up questions, and y'all just had such great questions. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to power through. I'm going to do it, but I'm gonna wear a sweatsuit while I do it. So I currently have on my hand-sewn sweatshirt and sweatpants that I made. It's so cozy. It's really great. It was a good decision. And with it, I'm wearing my Montana mountain cowl. I designed this for a retreat I taught at quite a few years ago now with the Farmer's Daughter Fibers in Montana. It was my first time to Montana, and I love this cowl. It's so fun to dig in to your pile of finished objects from a few years past, and I'm like, oh, I could knit another one. Look how cute. So anyways, that's what I'm wearing, and I do have a little bit of show and tell I'll get into towards the end, but otherwise let's jump into some questions. So for the first question is from a knitter working on the Weekender Light. I'm using it to get more comfortable with continental knitting. I have a long cord on it, but it takes time to shift the stitches around. In your experience, do you prefer to use a short cord just for knitting in the round on the body? I know colorwork has a consequence of too tight of floats if you don't space them out. I could find out myself, but if it changes the tension, I prefer not to have to tink it back. So, I personally think it's a little bit of like a Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation where it needs to be just right. You know, if it's too big, you're going to have what I think is what's happening with you, where it just takes so much extra effort to get those stitches around that big long cord. If it's too short, it's almost the same amount of effort because you have all these stitches jammed up. It's hard to move them on their way, and it could affect your tension. So I would definitely go to a shorter cord. I don't use a super short cord. It's that just right cord. So for me, I think I usually do the body of my sweaters on probably like the 32-inch cord. What is that in centimeters? 100? Is that the 100 centimeter? No, that's 40. 40 inches, 100 centimeters. So 32 would be 80 centimeters. Look at me go doing math on the fly. 24 inches would be 60 centimeters. So I would, if it were me, probably land around that 32 is I think what I default to. I could push it to a 24 if it's just stockinette, but I wouldn't for my size. This is obviously depending on the size you're knitting. 40 for me would probably turn into like that where it's just a little too long. Even if I'm knitting a 44-inch total circumference on that sweater, can she do it? What would that be? 110 centimeters? I'm so nosy. I'm up in my studio and there's windows. And anytime anyone drives by, I'm like, who's that? Who's driving by? Why are you driving by? Anyways, so yeah, I definitely would use a little bit of a smaller cord. This is such a long answer that doesn't need to be this long. So there you go. I would go down a little bit. And I think if you're not making a drastic change, you know, if you're not dropping from a 40-inch cord to a 20-inch cord, I don't think it's going to hugely affect your gauge. You know, if you're just dropping down 8 inches to the next size down, I think you'll be fine. Wow, sorry. I just took a little too long to answer that one. All right, the next question is, I am currently knitting the curio socks and am thoroughly enjoying the entire process. As I knit, I can't help but think this pattern would make a gorgeous pullover sweater, and I really hope this becomes a pattern someday. I was wondering how you determine which of your patterns you make into multiple designs. For example, the Traveler series of patterns or the Shift patterns. Is it based on your creative inspiration, physical characteristics of the pattern, based on popularity of the design or requests people have made, or does it change based on each pattern? Such a thoughtful question. So generally speaking, what it usually is that I have so much fun knitting that stitch pattern that my brain immediately starts plugging it in to different canvases. Like, you know, with the Traveler, I started that as a hoodie and had been wanting to do a texture like that for a long time. It's almost like exaggerated garter stitch. I love that texture so much. I could keep working with it forever. I really, really, really love knitting that texture. And same with the shift. Like I wanted, first it started with a cowl, so kind of the opposite of the Traveler. And then I wanted to see it on a bigger piece of fabric. So then I did the shawl. And then that was so much fun that I was like, okay, well now let's try the sweater. And I did a hat and then the cardigan. The cardigan definitely came from requests. So many people were like, can you please turn this into a cardigan? The Traveler, yeah, I just really fell in love with that stitch pattern, and I knew it would make for such a relaxing shawl. And I wanted to see it when I was trying on. So the Traveler went hoodie / crew neck, like sweatshirt kind of style, to the shell, which is like a little pullover travel cardigan. And that came because when I was traveling to the airport, I was like, there are times when you want something that's really easy to pull on and off. And when I was midway through knitting the hoodie version, or the crew version, whichever, I tried on the body before adding the neck or the sleeves. And I loved how that body fit and was like, oh, what else could I do with this? And I had been wanting to do those big angled pockets on something, and I loved how that worked with short rows in the hood. And so I was like, ooh, I could use short rows to do these really big angled pockets, and then I could line it up with the ridges in the sweater itself. So a lot of times it's that I'm having so much fun with the pattern itself, like the stitch pattern, that it's making me happy and I want to keep using it. And I think that then sometimes ties into the pattern's popularity, because if I have a ton of fun knitting it, usually that translates to meaning other people will have fun, right? Because hopefully that means it's a fun stitch pattern to knit. And so we were all like, ooh, I had so much fun with that. I want to do some more of it. You know, especially with something like the Shift series, because that plays with color in a way that I think got people really excited to explore color in that way. Same with fading, where you're just like, oh my gosh, I can use my yarn in this way I hadn't really thought of before. And now I want to do that again and again with this yarn that I have. So yeah, I also, the Traveler series, I realized that it played really well with hand spun or with combining two strands held together of random yarn. And so my goal then became, especially by the time I got to the cowl, I was like, could I make this kind of gaugeless in a way that people can grab what they have or what they're spinning and be able to use it almost no matter what. I mean, I have not tested the pattern out with like cobweb or lace weight or super bulky, but otherwise I think it's a very flexible pattern, and I love that idea too. There are certain things that really have to fit us in specific dimensions, but I love this idea of being able to be a little more loosey-goosey with our gauge and things like that, because I know a lot of us, we want to use what we have, or we're spinning yarn and we want to use our hand spun and it's inconsistent, or maybe it's kind of hard to spin up a yarn that's exactly the same weight as the one in the pattern. And it's so fun to use up yarns too. There are a lot of great yarns out there for blending together and holding multiple strands. So I do love exploring the idea of what else, or like how else could we navigate some of these patterns so that we can play with that. Anyways, that was a side tangent. That's what happened there. I just was like on my own little I like that question. It got me thinking. So yeah, usually it's that I have so much fun with it that I'm not ready to give it up yet and want to use it in new ways. So I think that's the simplest way I could say that. I'm knitting the Straya cardigan and I'm loving the project, but I'm getting nervous about the final bind off of the button band. I'm planning to do the tubular bind off, as that's what I've done for the cuffs and hem, and I find that bind off to be worth the effort, but I've never Kitchenered as many stitches as I'll have on the button band. How do you approach an extra long Kitchener routine? Do you really cut your tail about 3 times the length and then thread all that yarn multiple times through every stitch? Or do you work with shorter segments of yarn and weave in ends as needed to keep things more manageable? So I really do that really long yarn tail and pass it through every stitch. And it's a little bit of a beast, I'm not gonna lie. I highly, highly recommend, if you have not tried it yet, to do the Kitchener stitch on one needle, especially for a button band, because that is a lot of stitches, and it just, to me, it takes out that whole step of having to transfer half your stitches over to a second needle. Unless your brain is happier working Kitchener on 2 needles, by all means do what works best for you. But for me, that really, really helps speed things up, is skipping that step and just keeping everything on 1 needle. But I do, because what I don't want to do, I don't know that I would love how it would look to have to join a new yarn midway through that bind off and having to fiddle with either weaving in ends, which I feel like would disrupt the perfection that is that bind off, or trying to do a spit splice and then worrying, is it strong enough as I'm doing this Kitchener stitch, or am I accidentally going to tug a little bit and it's going to pop? So for me, I would rather have an extra long tail, and I make mine pretty extra long because I'm not trying to mess with yarn chicken there. But I just usually put on a great audiobook or podcast and I settle in, and I know that that Kitchener is going to take me an hour. Like, I know it's going to take me a good old chunk of time, and I'm just going to sit here and do it one step at a time. And another thing to think about, so my tips for it, for me personally, I am going to use 1 length of yarn. I am going to go slow so that I don't tangle that big old length of yarn. You know, I have it almost folded in half to help reduce how long it takes to pull it through each stitch. But by the end, I am like, oh my gosh, this is a dream, only having this much of a tail instead of 3 yards to wind through. But taking it slow, and do a stretch test as you go. I actually, what did I do with it? Oh, hey. So, it's not the one I need. Hold on. Oh, actually, this is another show and tell, so this is fun. So when I did a live version of this podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the questions I got asked was about how I knit my socks, which I do magic loop, like this. So I was so happy about that question because I needed a new walking project. I will walk more often and so much farther if I can knit while I do it. So I love to have a project like this. So these are the DRK everyday socks. This is unblocked, so it looks real silly. It is this giant long tube sock. But look how good these colors are. This is from Gauge Dye Works. What is it called? I want to say like Moon and Stars. I think I'm making that up though. I'm pretty sure. Something celestial. But anyways, the blue and that mustard yellow are like, I love it so much. And I did contrasting toe, heel, and then I even threw a little, like some sporty stripes at the cuff, because why not? But why am I showing you this? You're like, we were talking about the Straya cardigan. Why are you going on a sock tangent now? Well, because I did a tubular bind off for this sock. And so what I wanted to say is, as you go, the last thing you want, which you also really don't want on the top of your sock, is a too tight bind off. And you don't want that going around the button band either. So what I like to do is, as I'm doing that tubular bind off, I do just a little boop, boop, like stretch test as I go. So I do like an inch worth of stitches, and I just boop, boop, and just make sure that it is still being nice and stretchy, so that you don't do it too tight, because it is a little easy to do it too tight, especially when you're doing a whole bunch of stitches. But I have one sock down. I'm on to my second sock. I'm so worried I'm going to run out of the yellow, because this is what I have for the heel, and then I have a itty bitty little ball to do the stripes on my other sock. So we will see if both of these socks, these might not end up as matching socks, but I love them. So fingers crossed. Okay. Get these back in my bag. So if anybody else has any way that they love to do their tubular bind off, feel free to throw your tips down in the notes. I will throw that sock pattern down below just in case you're like, wait, what were those socks? Because I love them. They're my favorite socks. And I'll see if I can't find the actual name of that yarn and link that too. But it is from Gauge Dye Works. And I just love it. So, next question. I am knitting the Traveler Cowl using one of my hand spun skeins from Hedgehog Fibers in colorway Sweet Pea. I ran out of yarn about 2/3 of the way through knitting as I had only spun one braid, which came up to about 200 meters. Fortunately, one of my lovely friends gifted me a skein of her own hand spun in the same colorway so that I am able to finish my cowl. I love this. I love that now your cowl is going to be extra special because not only are you using your hand spun, but you have your friend's hand spun in there too. And I just feel like every time you wear that, it's just going to be this sweet little gift. Okay, but let's get to the question. This has me wondering, would you recommend buying 2 braids of the same color at a time? I usually get just one braid of a color and then end up wondering, what can I make out of my hand spun? How much fiber do you recommend getting for a cowl, a shawl, and a sweater spin? So it's obviously going to depend on the pattern. You know, you probably could get a very simple cowl out of one braid. You know, that's 4 ounces, 100 to 115 grams typically. So you might be able to do just a simple cowl. But if you wanted to do something like the DRK Everyday Cowl or the Traveler Cowl, then I might say I would do 2. 2 should be plenty and you'll have some extra. But one thing you can do, so let's say you're starting to have a little fiber stash, but you have been buying these single braids. Yes, from here on out, you could start buying more than one braid, but that's a slippery slope. All of a sudden, you might turn into somebody like me who's like, well, I should buy 6 braids so I can do a sweater. But then how many 6 braid quantities of fiber can you fit in one room, you know? So, so here's how I like to think about things in terms of stretching what you've got or what you tend to buy. So you tend to get a single braid. Hello, combo spins. Combo spins are my favorite. I just started a new one. It is what I used for both the Traveler shawl and the Traveler cowl. Those are all combo spins. So basically all a combo spin is using multiple braids or fiber sources and then spinning each one to its own bobbin and then plying them together. My personal favorite is a 3-ply. I love a 3-ply yarn. It really helps hide inconsistencies and it just gives you extra nuance. So usually what I do is I pick 3 that kind of go together. I actually just threw this up in my Instagram stories the other day and unfortunately don't have that fiber up here with me because it's downstairs with my wheel, or I would show you. It also applies to how I pick color for yarn combos. But basically, to summarize, I pick an anchor. So I pick the one braid or skein of yarn that's just making me feel so good, so happy. And I'm like, all right, here's my anchor. How am I gonna grow from here? And I look in that braid or that skein and I look for nuances of other colors. And then I see, okay, what do I have in my stash that has some of those other colors in it? Like, oh, this braid right here, and by braid I mean skein, actually has some ochre yellow. Do you see that right there? Oh, it's so pretty. And like a little bit of hot pink. I would love to see if I could find something else in my stash that had a little ochre, a little hot pink, so that it would really bring those little tiny pops of color out in there. Here's another skein. This is my show and tell for the end, but I'm just gonna, don't judge me for how messy it looks right now. It's actually still drying, so it is not wound into a skein yet. But again, like, look at all this opportunity I have. I could go blue, pink, yellow. I could go a deeper purple. I could do a gradient. So I have an anchor, and then from there I pick 2 other colors that somehow tie into my anchor. And now you've just gone from a single quantity of fiber or yarn. So let's stick with that 4 ounce, 100 grams, because it's a really common amount for both fiber and a skein of yarn. So you just went from having that to tripling it. And now you could do a shawl, a smaller shawl. So let's go back to your question of like, how much fiber do you recommend getting? So let's say, okay, this is great. That's a great way for me to think about how to use my stash, but I'm going to go buy something special. I'm going to treat myself to some fiber for this next project. So for a cowl, as I said, I would probably start with at least 2 braids. For a shawl, I think you're probably going to need closer to 4, depending on how big you like your shawls and how you're going to spin that fiber. I mean, how you spin it plays a very important role in how much yardage you're going to end up with, right? Like you could end up with a whole ton of yardage depending on how fine and airy you spin that yarn, or you might spin it really dense. I mean, you might make an art yarn and only have less than 100 yards by the time you're done with that one braid. So obviously how you spin it plays a big part, but I'm just giving you my rough numbers for that time that I see that color that I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it so much. And I know I want to do a project with it and it's going to be one of these 3 things. Here's my default numbers for you. Okay. Just keep in mind how you spin it will matter on how much yardage you end up with. So cowl, I would say 2 braids. Shawl, I would say 4 to 6. 6 seems excessive. Let's say 3 to 5, depending on if you're going to do more of a shawlette or a full-size shawl. 5's going to be more than enough. For a sweater, I default to 6. Now, I have a friend who it took them only 12 ounces, so that would be 300 grams-ish to 360-ish of fiber, and they knit a sweater out of it, but they spun it woolen. So again, they were really able to stretch that. So I'm talking weight. I don't know why I feel like I have to keep pushing this part of it home, but like it depends how you spin it. So back to just my default. My default quantity for sweaters is 6 braids, or let's see, 6 times 4, 24 ounces or 600 grams ish is about where I fall on for a sweater. One other thing to consider is the size of whatever you're going to make is obviously going to affect how much of the material you need, how you spin it, and if you're going to do sampling. So that's another thing to consider. I did a sweater spin this past year. I had my little samples on my desk, but I think I finally tucked them away with my finished sweater spin. But I ended up using an entire braid just to sample. So I spun it up, and I knew I wanted to do a fractal, but I wanted to play with how I was going to break that fractal down. And so I spun up an entire braid into samples, and then I spun up 6 more braids for the actual sweater spin. I know I'm going to have extra, but when it comes to spinning yarn and using that yarn for a project, I think it is, for me, easier to know I'm going to have a little too much than to not have enough, because I'm not a super technical spinner. I'm a very intuitive knitter, and getting back into the mindset I was in when I originally spun that sweater quantity, which could take me up to a year. If I ran out and then had to spin more, I'd be like, what was I doing here? And I take fairly decent notes. I do have a spinning journal. But I would rather have more and then use the extra for hats, mittens, gift it to one of my spinning pals. It's always nice to get, or my knitting pals. It's always nice to be gifted a little hand spun yarn. So 6 is my go-to. And I've knit quite a few hand spun sweaters now, and I do always have some extra. But that's still just where I feel comfortable. I think I could probably now stick with 6 and still have enough for sampling, but I don't know if I'd want to sample a whole braid then. I get nervous. So there you go. Cowl 2, shawl 3 to 5, sweater 6. Some people say for a sweater you should do 2 pounds, which would be 32 ounces. That's a lot. I don't know that you're going to need that much, depending on, also, I don't do a ton of like long sweaters. So it really depends on what you want to make. That's what this is all coming down to. I'm still saying it. It really comes down to what you want to make. Because if you're going to do a longer cardigan, and like my big cozy, that's an oversized cardigan, so I would need more fiber for that than LYS, which is my little cropped yellow cardigan. I mean, oh well, very different. So you know what you want to knit. Look at how much yardage you would typically use and look at that yarn weight. And then I also would recommend, and there's whole blog posts, I should say, written about this. Like if you actually want to technically get into it, I'm just giving you my go-to numbers, but there's people who actually do the technical thing and can really tell you. But I think that kind of falls into like a magic numbers category that would be nice to have. We've talked about magic numbers on here. I love to write little notes to myself, like even for those DRK everyday socks, I've knit them so many times. I know how many rounds I need to knit for my foot length. Like I know I have to knit, I think it's 54 rounds or something. Like I know that exact number because I've done it so much. So I jot that number down. It's the number, I know that I love like this much ease in a raglan and this length. Like I love this length of sleeve, you know? So I keep all those numbers written down so that I can easily pull that out. So that's the numbers that works for me when I'm buying fiber. But you can learn for yourself, and the same for yarn. Like once we have practiced and we've done it a few times, you'll probably start to notice those patterns and be like, oh, I tend to use about this much. So now I know if I'm just at a big festival and this is my special souvenir I'm going to take home, is I'm going to get, let's say, a sweater's quantity. I know that this is roughly about what I end up using. So I know I need to get at least this many skeins or braids or whatever it may be. Wow. I am just, apparently being under the weather makes me very long-winded. Okay, question 5. I have finally cast on the Shiftkin cardigan. As a longtime knitter, when I choose patterns, I'm always looking for new things to learn. I love that. The Shiftkin will be my first steek. Super excited. As every good knitter, while reading the pattern in full, you mentioned loving to pick up the button band before the steek. I sure do. I looked at the link shared in the pattern on this topic and still have a question. What is the benefit of doing this technique versus picking up after the steek? Why do you love doing this? I was so happy to get this question because I could not remember if I've answered it on here before, and I feel strongly about it. So I was like, yes. Oh, I can't wait to tell you. So here is why I love to do the button band first. 2 things. First, and most important, when we are picking up stitches for our button band, we're putting a little stress on that area. So when we've cut a sweater open, a lot of us get nervous about the fact that we've just cut open our knitting. And so then having to pick up stitches into that area that we're a little scared to put any stress on, if you pick up the button band before, you don't have to worry about the fact that you're then going to be tugging or pulling at that area as you knit your button band. So you're doing that before you've cut it open, and just it feels safer. The other reason I love it is what happens when you pick up that button band on both sides is it naturally kind of pulls open, and it's like, oh, here is where you cut me open. And that's one of the weirdest things I've ever sang on this podcast. But I love that. I love that it keeps it so easy to see where I'm going and what I'm doing. So that's why I like to do it first. I feel safer doing it. I feel like I'm not tugging on the area that I just cut open. And I also feel like it frames where I do need to make that cut so perfectly for me when I'm ready. Not to mention, it's so satisfying that after you cut it open, you just tack that down and you're like, ah, give this one more block and it is done. Well, sew on some buttons, but you know. Okay, I have one more question because it was a bonus question because it's a quickie, but somebody asked, last week you talked about your sewing patterns. I also use Swedish tracing paper, but my question is, how do you store your printed patterns? And I just realized we tucked them away. Let's see if you can listen to me while I leave to pull this over here. Oh, this is going to be kind of obnoxious to pull over. Okay, I'm not going to do it. I mean, this is a bad idea. So I'll bring this over. over to you. Okay. I have another one of these. It is just, I think it was from IKEA or Target. It is just a pop-up felted bin. And I had an extra one. And so that is what all my long rolled up paper patterns are sticking out of in a little side storage room. I had them out forever, but we also have a little area over there with like our few little, not barbells, dumbbells and a yoga mat so we work out. And so I had my sewing patterns like leaning over where we try to work out. So now they're tucked away. But yeah, I just put them all in there and apparently now throw them in a closet. But that's it. It's nothing too fancy. I do see people using like even like a pretty round like hamper. That looks probably a lot nicer than my bonus box I had lying around. But okay, so I will show a little show and tell and then I'm gonna rest a little bit. So I did some plying this week. I realized I have been spindle spinning up such a storm that every single one of my extra weaving bobbins was used. I was like, okay, I've got to start plying because I'm out of storage bobbins. So this spin was so much fun. This is a Chaos Bat from Melly Knits. This is wool that was from a burn pile, which means exactly that. That yarn, that fiber was going to be thrown away and burned, and it got saved, and she made it into this bat that is one of my favorite things I've ever spun. It was so delightful to spin. I mean, I enjoyed every minute of it. I have to say, I am shocked by my deep, deep love of supported spindle spinning. I really did not think anything could trump the wheel for me. Supports might have done it. I mean, don't tell my wheels, but I just love them. It is this whole new sense of calm and fun, and I just love it. And I love that it kind of slows it down. You get to really enjoy every little bit of that fiber. Anyways, so it was called Mooncake was the name of the bat, and I love it. It is woolen spun. I spun it long draw, supported long draw on my spindles. I have not gotten any kinds of specs on it yet. I'm gonna guess it's DK. If I just look down at it, it fluffed up so nice in its bath, but it just finished drying yesterday, so I haven't done any of its specs. These two are still drying. These are two more supported spindle spins, all 3-plies. I just love a 3-ply. I'm trying to get myself to do, I actually have two 2-plies going now that I'm a little nervous about. Anyways, only because I'm worried that I'm going to accidentally default back to spinning finer and I'm going to have really inconsistent yarn, but we will see. Anyways, this is fiber that I got at Rhinebeck this year from the Woodland Pixie. Also, such a joy to spin. I am trying to keep an eye on her shop because I want more of her fiber. I loved everything in here. There's some sari silk. There's a few different things. She actually, and I need to find the bag because she actually almost has like, it's like a little mood board right on the card that was in there. But anyways, I picked it up at Rhinebeck along with my first support spindle, and it was an absolute delight to spin up. I highly enjoyed it. She did an advent this year that I was too late to take advantage of, but it looked really fun. I saw a lot of people's Instagram posts. And I was like, oh, that looks like so much fun. All right, this, I'm so sorry for the bag crinkling. I hate when I have to crinkle a bag on here. I just feel like it's very rude and I apologize. But I'm gonna do it so that I can tell you what this one is. This is from Mork Made Fiber, and it's Merino, Firestar, Angelina Sparkle, and 3 different kinds of silk. My goodness. So that is, I kind of liked when I twirled them up so you can kind of, it'll focus in on it a little bit. This is a lovely mint green, and it had some hot pink and some ochre yellow in there that I loved, especially when I was plying it. When I would get to those ochre yellow bits, I wish there was even more of it because it was so pretty. So I picked this up at Sacred Sheep. They had a booth, and there are these actual beautiful art bats, and I had never spun up an art bat. I actually, because I was doing it on my supports, I ended up turning it into Rolex, which blended it up a little bit more because I didn't want to have the big strips of like silk and stuff as I was spinning. It felt easier to me to have it be a little more blended and to have it in that Rolex form. That was really helpful for me when I started spinning on supports, was Rolex. I've shown them here before, so now I just have this one always sitting over here, but this is a Rolex. And you spin from one end, and as you spin, that fiber twirls. It like creates this perfect tube to do long draw or supported long draw, which is perfect for those support spindles. So that is what I did, is I made a whole bunch of Rolex and spun them up, and here we go. So I have 3 no skeins that need me to look at what they are, and I should probably write those down just in case anyone's interested. I will write down those fiber companies for y'all. We are still doing the 100 days of spindle spinning challenge. It is, I don't even know what day it is. How many days we're in December and January? Probably like 61-ish. And so today's like day 70-ish. So you still have time to join in the fun. Got a whole month left, got 30 days left. So if you want to join in on the fun, and all spinners welcome, you can spin on whatever you like. If you're making yarn, you're welcome to join. I have been keeping the hashtag for that down below, as well as the link to the Ravelry group forum if you want to chat, or if you're just thinking about it and you want to talk to people who are loving spinning, then that is a good place to go chat about it. So I also have some little mini samples, but they're just little mini samples. They're probably not as fun for my show and tell. So I'm gonna end this here. I'm gonna go make some tea and stare out a window for a little bit. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope if you're under the weather that you can have some self-care time, drink some tea, snuggle up with some fiber arts until you feel better. And thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope to see you back here next week. As always, you can find the questions I answered down below, along with a link to ask your own question and links to anything else I've chatted about, such as the cowl I'm wearing today. And I'm so grateful for you, and I hope to see you back next week. Bye.